So as you guys know, the Season 3 Reloaded update came out. So in today's video, I'm giving you guys my top 5 close range loadouts in Warzone Season 3 Reloaded. We'll be going through each weapon and each attachment that you guys should be running, especially after all the weapon changes. With that being said, let's jump right into it. So getting right into it, the first SMG that we have on the list is the Striker. So if you guys didn't know, this thing actually got buffed in the recent update, and what's crazy is the Striker was already a solid SMG. They actually buffed the minimum damage on the Striker to 28, up from 23, which is insane. So with the buff, the Striker is definitely my #1 go-to SMG. And so for the Striker build, we're going to throw on the Zim 35 compensated flash hider for the muzzle. I definitely think you should be running this muzzle on almost every single one of your SMGs. This muzzle literally adds such a smoothness to each one of your weapons whenever you shoot it, no matter how the recoil pattern is. It just makes it really smooth. But not only does it just make it so smooth, but it also gives you vertical recoil, horizontal recoil, firing aiming stability. Really, the only downside to this muzzle is the ADS speed and the bullet velocity, but you can't really tell that much. Moving on to the underbarrel, we got the XRK Edge BW4 hand stop. This gives you aim walking speed, movement speed, aim down sight speed, and sprint to fire speed. Now, if you really wanted to, what you could do is replace this for the DR6 hand stop, which is what I use on most of my SMGs. But nonetheless, it's either the DR6 hand stop or the Edge BW4 hand stop that I use. One of these two. But for this build specifically, we're going for aim walking speed and movement speed, so we're going with the XRK Edge BW4 hand stop. Next up, we got a 48 round mag, and the reason I chose this instead of the 60 is just simply for the movement speed. Like I said, again, this is a movement build. And then the next one we got is the no stock, which gives you aim down sight speed, sprint to fire speed, aim walking speed, hip fire, and tac stance spread. Now, yes, obviously this does add a lot of gun kick, aiming, idle sway, flinch resistance, and recoil control, but again, it is an SMG, and this is a movement build, so we're going for max mobility. Then the last attachment is the rear grip, the tac grip, which gives you tac stance spread and sprint to fire speed. Another thing that you could do is maybe take off the rear grip and then throw on this Striker stubby barrel, but the only reason I did not add this is because of how much it hurts the effective damage range, the minimum damage range, and the bullet velocity. But to each their own, this is the build that I'm rocking with the Striker. This is my go-to SMG when I hop into Warzone. And yes, before we continue, this is typically how I build my SMG, strictly for movement, because you're typically not going to use your SMG outside of 10 meters very much, and if you do this Striker build, it's got you covered. Number 2 on this list is going to be the MCW, but as an SMG. Now, this one honestly might become my #1 here pretty soon. In this build, we're going to be using the Jack Raven conversion kit, as you guys know, to turn this thing into an SMG. It basically ups the fire rate, the mobility and handling, damage at close range, and the hip fire and tac stance spread. Obviously, the only problem is the bullet velocity and range and the recoil control, but trust me, it's not that bad. If you guys have not been rocking this thing, trust me, give this thing a try. With this build for the muzzle, we're also going with the Zim 35 compensated flash hider. Again, just building it as if it's an SMG. This really helps smoothen out the recoil, gives it literally no visual recoil. For the underbarrel, we're going with the DR6 hand stop for increased ADS speed, aim walking speed, sprint to fire speed, and movement speed. Now, I wish you could do more, but we're going with the 40 round mag. That's the most that you could put on it. And then for the rear grip, we're going with the RB Rapid Strike grip. This one is for sprint to fire speed and ADS. Now, just to give you guys some more options, what you could honestly do is take off the underbarrel and put on high grade rounds if you wanted, or you could even take that off and throw on the Cyclone barrel. You could really do whatever you want, personal preference to be honest, and you can maybe even throw on the new Jack Cutthroat stock, which I have not tried yet, but we might try here pretty soon, so stay tuned. This would give you insane ADS movement speed, but I honestly think the negatives weigh out the pros. So that's the build that we're rocking with the MCW as an SMG. And so with that being said, we're moving on to SMG number 3. This is the BP50, but with the Jack Revenger kit. As you guys know, this Jack Revenger kit is kind of new, and it is absolutely insane. This basically gives you vertical recoil control, aim down sight speed, and movement speed, but it does kind of hurt the bullet velocity and range and the horizontal recoil. Now, I think the only problem with this conversion kit is there's not many options here for attachments, but I do definitely think this conversion kit makes up for it because it gives you plus 10% movement speed, cuts down the ADS speed by 21%, and 26% for the sprint to fire speed. And the BP50 already had a fast fire rate, and now we have a plus 15% fire rate for the BP50. And so that's attachment number 1, the Jack Revenger kit. And you guys already know, you probably guessed it, the next attachment we're going with is the Zim 35 compensated flash hider. Next thing we're going with is this laser, the EXF solar flare laser, which gives you sprint to fire speed and aiming stability. Now, the only problem is the flashlight is visible to enemies, so you could change this out for something that is something like the 1mm quick fire laser, which has no cons. Totally up to you. And the next thing that we're going with is the 9mm high grain rounds to give it some extra bullet velocity and damage range. And I personally like the iron sight for the BP50, so we're going with the rear grip, the CCG tack tape, which gives you tack stance spread and sprint to fire speed. Now, again, there's not many options, but I did try to build this for max mobility, and this thing feels pretty nice. It moves pretty fast. Like I said, the movement speed is drastically increased with the conversion kit, so it honestly feels like you are zooming around the map. And as you guys can see, this fire rate is extremely fast. So this BP50 build right here is the one that I'm rocking as an SMG, and this was my go-to before all of the weapon changes, so definitely give this thing a try. Next up on the list, we have, honestly, one of my favorites, the WSP9. Now, I think all they did in the update to this weapon is change the sprint to fire speed, which is honestly a W. And so with that being said, the WSP9 has been a very strong weapon for a very long time, and they didn't change any of the damage value, so to this day, it is still pretty strong. And so with this build, you already know we're going with the M35 compensated flash hider. Do I really need to explain that one? The underbarrel, we're going again with the DR6 hand stop for ADS speed, aim walking speed, sprint to fire, and movement speed. And then we're going with the 40 round mag, but you could also go with the 50. I do it just, again, for movement speed, especially for a map like Rebirth, but we got the 40 round mag. And then we also got the no stock for max movement speed, for sprint to fire speed, movement speed, aim walking speed, and ADS speed. And because the no stock obviously gives it a lot of gun kick and increases the recoil and all of that, basically, we're going to try to minimize that by throwing on an optic, and I personally chose the NIDAR model 2023. For an SMG, this is honestly probably one of my favorite optics. If I do decide to use one, usually I am an iron sight type of guy and I don't mind the iron sights, but with this no stock, it does kind of make the WSP9 shake a little bit. So throwing on this M compensated flash hider and also this NIDAR model, it is pretty easy to control. Definitely gives it a lot smoother of a recoil pattern. If you didn't notice by now, for a lot of these builds, I don't throw on a barrel anymore. Now, you could throw on a barrel if you wanted, but I've just noticed that, especially with the damage values on a lot of these weapons, you're not really fighting past 10 to 15 meters max, so there's really no need for a barrel for you to have 20 plus meters on your effective damage range. Most of your battles are going to be close quarters with an SMG, so I build all of my SMGs and all of my secondaries for max movement speed possible, especially if you're playing on a map like Rebirth. With that being said, that brings us to our last close range weapon, and that is the Striker 9. Now, I've had a love-hate relationship with the Striker 9 for a very long time, but definitely as of the past few weeks, I've began to love the Striker 9. And one thing I do like about the Striker 9 is just how consistent it is. And honestly, with this build, you can't go wrong with it. You guys already know we got the M35 compensated flash hider, the DR6 hand stop for ADS speed, aim walking speed, sprint to fire, and movement speed. And then with this one, we're throwing on the 50 round mag. Next attachment we got is the no stock for sprint to fire, movement speed, aim walking speed, and ADS speed. Now, this is where I switch things up just a little bit. We got the rear grip, the Seiken ZX grip, which helps with firing, aiming stability, gun kick control, and recoil control. Now, I know I said I build my SMGs for max movement speed, but with this build specifically with the Striker 9, it does tend to get a little inaccurate whenever you don't use this rear grip. And so I threw on the rear grip to kind of help with the idle sway and the sway while you're shooting, and I just feel like I was missing a lot of my shots because I didn't have this rear grip. Once I threw this on, it smoothed out a little bit, and so I definitely recommend giving this specific build a try. Again, for all of these builds, it's all definitely personal preference. You could switch out a few attachments if you wanted to. Totally up to you. You could go with a different stock if you wanted to. You could go with something like the Lockman BR400 heavy brace stock for movement speed and sprint speed. Maybe even the Lockman MK2, which is what I used to run. It's definitely all personal preference at the end of the day, but I definitely wouldn't recommend throwing on a barrel unless you plan on going outside of 10 meters for these gunfights. Now, for this Striker 9, if you wanted to go with even faster movement speed, you could take off the rear grip and you could go with the Striker stubby barrel and give you even more movement speed, but your effective damage range, minimum damage range, and bullet velocity does suffer. But again, it's totally up to you. What I would recommend doing is using all of these builds as a reference point. Try them out if you would like to kind of build out your own SMG or your own weapons and see what works best for you. That is it for today's video. That is my top 5 close range meta loadouts for Warzone Season 3. Give these builds a try and definitely let me know what you guys think of these builds down in the comments. Now, before we go, as you guys know, the BAL 27 was released into the game, and so if you guys need a build for that, go ahead and check this video out.